Proverbs 6 verses 1 to 5. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbour, if you have shaken hands in a pledge for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, to free yourself, since you have fallen into your neighbour's hands. Go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbour no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. This passage gives examples of deals struck. Putting up security for someone, going guarantor on a loan, striking hands in a pledge. And then it tells you that these things can trap you and snare you. If you have made a promise rashly or just a passing comment, you're trapped. You have ensnared yourself to fulfill that promise or agreement. You are now required to keep that oath, keep that promise, and if you don't, you are then known as unreliable or a promise keeper or a promise breaker or a liar. This passage tells us what we need to do when we have gotten ourselves into such a situation. So this passage is actually about being seen as reliable, trustworthy and honest. It's not just in matters of making oaths and things like that. A lot of those may not be very relevant for us. They're used as examples in this passage to help us think about honesty and reliability in general. Think about yourself. Now maybe just forget about these big scale things or grand scale lies, but bring it back down to these smaller ones. How often do we make flippant promises to people and then let them down? This shows to them that we aren't a trustworthy person. But we can easily make flippant promises, can't we? Without thinking. What about these following ones? Yes, darling, I'll do that. Oh yeah, I'll be home from work before dinner. We should catch up for a coffee sometime. I'll be praying for you. Many of these things we can say without meaning them, without even any intent of following through with them, just because we think it's the right thing to say. And the writer of this proverb tells us to flee from situations like this. Run from dishonesty. Run from flippancy. And he does this through giving an illustration from nature. Birds and gazelles. Think about birds. It's one of my favourite riddles. If there's 10 birds in a tree and you shoot one, how many are left? Well, there's none, right? One's shot, but the rest have flown. And that pretty much sums up the defense mechanism of birds. If there's any sign of trouble, they get out of there. Gazelles, although these animals have horns, their preferred defense mechanism is just to leg it. They do a little spring in the air and then run off as fast as they can. These animals don't try to fight. They don't try to stand their ground. They just run. And the proverb is telling us to flee like a frightened animal from dishonesty. If you're in a situation where you need to be dishonest or where you think you may be dishonest, run in the opposite direction. Because part of living a wise and godly life is to be honest. And Jesus tells us the same thing in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:33 to 37. Jesus says this, "Again you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say," Jesus says, "is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." Jesus is talking here about keeping your word. Technically, back then you could make an oath, which means you were bound to it. But that lent itself to the idea that if you didn't make an oath, you just said something, then you could break it as much as you wanted. You could go back on your word. But Jesus says no. We should be known as trustworthy people. Your yes should be yes, and your no, no. There is no such thing as levels of honesty. And the simplicity of Jesus' statement and the proverb reminds us that we are to be consistent. There are no big or small matters when it comes to being consistent and truthful. There are actually no areas of truth where we can afford to be flippant or hasty, that we are to run from dishonesty and be simple with our yes and our no. So even those little things that we think may not matter, if we get caught or may not upset people, they still dishonour God. A God who is a God of honesty. A God is one who we can trust. And a God who calls us to be honest, trustworthy, and fulfilling our promises. So go in peace today. Let your yes be yes. Let your no, no. And flee from all dishonesty.